Backing on the beer school that we did a couple of weeks ago where we celebrated spring beers. So today's beer school is probably going to be an extension of that, where we get into a few other more specific flavors that kind of remind us of spring. They're floral, they're fruity, kind of tart, crisp, refreshing, and then it's still cool too. So we're going to actually have a beer that we're going to follow up on that's a little on the stronger side without veering from that crisp, clean, refreshing, fruity, floral mantra that we kind of started with the first 5 beers. This time of year, we're seeing a lot of seasonal beers come out. The seasonal creep is really big when it comes to beer, like it is a lot of other foods and festive things you find in the grocery stores. So even though it might be a little on the cooler side, we're still already seeing Bell's come out with some of their more spring forward beers. Brooklyn's doing that. So a lot of people are putting out some things to remind you of summer. When you think about seasonal beers, you have 2 big groupings. You have fall and winter beers that kind of taste similar. Then you have spring and summer beers that also taste kind of similar on their own right. When we get into some of these beers, we're going to be looking at beers that are really well suited for the pool, really well suited for hiking, really well suited to do a lot of these really neat activities whenever the COVID-19 virus lifts, and we're able to do some of these fun things. But all these beers are going to be a little bit lighter in body. They're going to be a little bit lighter in color, perhaps. They're going to be a little bit lighter in their overall flavor profile. They're going to have a little bit more of a simplistic characteristics. The nuances that we're used to tasting beer are going to be a little bit more subdued, even though they can have a lot of variety associated with their flavors. These beers are going to trend a little bit more on the hoppier side. They're going to celebrate the more floral characteristics of the hops. Kettle sours have become really popular beers. In other words, beers that's been quick soured by brewers and put out there. Sometimes those can leave you wanting a little bit more, so brewers are apt to add some flavorings, largely fruits, to those kind of beers. So we're going to get to all those sort of flavors as things go along. There's not a whole lot of history or science really back up the kind of things that we're going to be talking about today in any large degree. So we're going to skim the surface of 6 different kind of beers, and they hinge around the same styles, but they can be a little bit on the different side too. You can kind of think of this as being a little bit more of 6 individual beer schools that hit the surface. They don't go very deep into a whole lot of characteristics at all. So without any further ado, let's just go ahead and get into some of the beers. Slangria is a really nice beer that Rhinegeist put out back last summer, and so we're celebrating those again. And just like the name Slangria is a spin-off the term sangria. So you can expect that a little bit of a tart, refreshing, fruity characteristic to show up in these beers, just like they show up in those wine concoctions. Really what we're looking at here are flavors of apple, pomegranate, blueberry, and lime that's kind of layered over a really gentle tartness to the underlying beer. The underlying tartness can exhibit characteristics like cider, white wine, lemon, lime, some of those sort of flavors. And then these other fruit flavors that we see layered on top of there can accent those natural fermentation flavors from the kettle souring that goes on at the brewery. Very clean, very refreshing with hints of these fruits. When we talk about these fruits, it's not a big flavor, it's going to smack you in the face. It's a very subdued, but well-rounded. So there's a little bit of a robust characteristic that comes from the pomegranate and the blueberry that remind you of wintry kind of flavors. But then the underlying body is going to be a little on the acidic side, a little on the drier side to really refresh the palate, keep things nice and clean in the finish. One of the staple beers that we really enjoy celebrating this time of year is Bell's Oberon. It's usually one of the first beers that come out that celebrates the spring and summer, and the season on this is quite long. I think that we're able to get these beers in 8 or 9 months of the year, but we're already seeing a huge uptick in the flavors, in the sales that we're seeing on this beer. People are coming and buying it in droves. We really can't buy enough of these beers right now. It's an American Pale Wheat Ale that does some things slightly different. It's not as sweet or as cereal grain driven as you would think. It actually finishes a little on the drier, almost minty side, even though the upfront characteristics can be strong of the orange, the coriander spice, some other kind of lemon flavors kind of coming out of this, some juiciness, and maybe some pear and those flavors. White pepper, vanilla. It's got a lot of understated complexities that come along with the flavors here, even though everything is going to favor the light flavor profiles. Just because we say light in flavor doesn't mean we necessarily have to give up on complexity, and that's a characteristic that's hard to, it's one of those intangibles the brewers have a hard time achieving, but Bell's have done this perfectly, and they've been making this beer for a very long time. The appearance of the can just screams spring and summer to me. Another beer that's been really nice here lately has been the Brooklyn, the Rosé de Ville. It's a kettle soured ale that's a little bit more on the sour side, a little bit more alcoholic than maybe your Goses and Berliner Weiss at 5.8% alcohol. Rosy, when you pour it, it's going to have this really nice little rosy kind of hue, and the reason why is because just like in pink lemonade, they added a little bit of raspberries to make the pink lemonade turn pinky, give it a little extra kind of dimension that's hard to put your finger on. The same raspberries are used in this kettle sour ale, and it gives the beer not only that color, but gives it a little bit more of a robust berry kind of flavor as well that you had a hard time putting your finger on if they hadn't written it on the label. Very simplistic in its nature. This is not a very complex beer. You get those underlying sour flavors of those white wine, the crab apple or green apple. You get lemon, some lime, maybe some gooseberry characteristics, but those things are very mild. They weave into each other really well. But this raspberry is a little bit of a standout kind of flavor without completely dominating the palate. And for the people that kind of want to jump into summer a little on the early side, Oxbow, really popular brewery for making Belgian-style farmhouse ales. Ales that have a really complex yeast characteristic that gives you a lot of peppery phenols and a moderate amount of fruits. Usually Belgian breweries, they like to say that if you get equal parts fruit and spice, then that's a well-made beer. However, there's a few styles that allows you to have that balance to shift a little bit. The farmhouse ales or the saisons are one of those where the fruit flavors are a little bit more subdued, but the spice flavors are very elevated. That promotes a little bit more of a peppery kind of edge. Part of that comes from the phenols of the yeast, but some of that also comes from the liberal hopping rates of the saison. And we're going to get into more of a saison beer school once summer hits. But this is a really fascinating beer. It's got some fruit flavors of maybe some weathered pear, some weathered grapefruit, lemons, some apples. So those flavors are kind of redolent in a beer like this, but it's also a little bit more on the weather or age or almost like the branch dry characteristics, a little bit more on the dehydrated characteristics. The spice flavor is going to remind you a little bit more of straight up peppercorn, fresh cracked peppercorn, white pepper, maybe some cumin, maybe some clove. Lemongrass, part of that's the phenol complex, but part of that's the hops, and you get some flavors to kind of combine that way to remind you just as lemongrass or lemon pepper in the finish. Very strong hay and straw component to finish, and if I'm saying words that may not seem particularly appealing, you got to taste this beer to believe it. It's actually a really well done beer. Big bubbles, big carbonation, strips the thirst with ease, and it really does facilitate a really great sense of drinkability. One of the more exciting beers that come this way is Slush. Slush is by Prairie Brewing Company. This is not a subtle, this is not a nuanced sour ale with fruit. Just like the name suggests, slushy. That's kind of a trend that's been going on in craft beers here the last couple of years, where in the wintertime you have pastry stouts. Well, in the summertime you can have slushy IPAs. And as a childhood, you used to go into the convenience store and getting a slushy. Some of the flavors really do show up here. Big fruit components here. So we're looking at fruit flavors of strawberry, raspberry, lemon, and lime. Again, a kettle soured ale, largely mirrored after the Gose style. This one, the raspberry flavors in this and really does stand tall. Big, juicy, a little bit more of a medium to full-bodied sour up front. It's got this really huge juicy component to it. You get some cereal grains that really do lock in a lot of the sweetness, even though the beer will trail fairly dry, crisp, and refreshing as well, with a linger of raspberry on the palate. The lemon and lime flavors in this beer, they do elevate the natural lemon and lime characteristics that the sour ale has already. The strawberry doesn't show up too much. It shows up a little bit more like a rhubarb kind of tartness, but the raspberry is a standout flavor here. So if you want a little bit more of a full-bodied sour ale, this is going to give it to you. And wrap it up today with Beer School. We have the Triple Carmelite, which is my favorite triple in the whole world. I know some of the Trappist breweries out there make some really nice triples, but this is not a Trappist brewery. It's a secular brewery that makes a really nice triple. One of the reasons why I like this one so much is because it has that fresh floral characteristic that you don't often get in a triple. Triples can be a little bit more on the bitter side from the hop use. And they don't normally prize that floral characteristic as much as you think, not unlike a Belgian strong golden ale. So the triples are a little bit of a misnomer of a style, but they kind of nailed that characteristic. They bring some of the most floral components of the hops from the Belgian strong golden ale, but they've also locked in that kind of dry, crisp, and almost bitter refreshment that classic Trappist triples will have. This is our best-selling triple, largely because of the staff recommendations here at the Beer Trap. So we really do enjoy this one quite well. A couple years ago, a trip to Belgium, I noticed that the darker beers from Belgium, whether it be the double or whether it be some sort of amber or whether it be the dark strong ale, those largely taste the same in Belgium as they did here in America. In other words, as the beer traveled from Europe to America, it didn't lose much of the characteristics. But the lighter colored beers changed a lot. In Belgium, the lighter colored beers had a much more snappy maltiness to them. They had a little bit more of this refreshing characteristic, a zeal, a zest to it that you just don't get here in the States, and also had a big floral component across the board. Triple Carmelite is one of the only beers of the light colored families that retained a lot of that, and that's one of the reasons why I like this beer a lot too. It just reminds me of that trip, and I enjoy that trip very fondly. Food pairings with all of these beers are going to dance all over the place, but you're going to think of summer salads. You're going to think of some fish dishes. You're going to think of some lighter pasta dishes. You don't have to think about necessarily pairing these with hard-boiled eggs or Easter bunny ears, even though feel free to do that. Those are kind of fun things to do also. But pour these into kind of a tulip kind of glass to accent that kind of floral characteristics. Most of these beers, I don't suggest that you age them. They're best consumed fairly fresh, just the way they go. And so I think these you're going to enjoy these quite well. A little bit more of a chintzy, a little bit more of a gimmick beer school today without a whole lot of nuts and bolts associated with it. So I want to thank you guys for tuning in to YouTube and checking this out. Let me know what you're drinking this Easter. What beers do you find favorite this time of year? Kind of a little bit on the cooler side maybe at nights, maybe some rainy patterns, but also some sun and some warming patterns ahead as well. So let me know what you're drinking, and thank you very much. We'll see you next week.